Welcome back to the Morning Kickoff Show. I'm your host, Matt Witt, and we are here to recover and put a lot of the blame on this Minnesota Vikings team. The Minnesota Vikings have fallen 41-17 to the arch rival Green Bay Packers in yet another game that had a lot on the line for the Minnesota Vikings. This now marks the fourth loss this season the Minnesota Vikings have against NFC opponents who are currently in the playoff picture or the hunt. As of right now, the Minnesota Vikings have been humiliated by multiple teams who we will likely have to face in this playoffs. Not only did the Minnesota Vikings just lose the chance at getting the top seed in the NFC, but now we just gave the Packers, Aaron Rodgers, a chance to make the playoffs. I mean, anytime there's something on the line for the Minnesota Vikings, they look bad. We got humiliated against the Cowboys, a team that will be in the playoffs, humiliated against the Eagles, a team that will also be in the playoffs, the Detroit Lions and Packers, two teams that are competing for the playoffs right now. I mean, I don't know what else there is to see. I don't know what else there is to see for this Minnesota Vikings team to say that this looks like a Super Bowl team. Like I've said many times this season, and I'll continue to say it. What is a Super Bowl team? A Super Bowl team, in my opinion, is a team that can win in multiple different ways and multiple different environments. Well, what we've seen from the Minnesota Vikings this season, we can win in multiple different ways. We've won based off of offense alone, and we've won based off of winning turnover battles. But we have some bad losses. But we seem to not be able to beat teams who we will likely have to face in the playoffs. Can the Vikings win in many different environments? No, we cannot. Anytime we go on the road, we look bad. This is exactly what we've seen this season. And something I just can't wrap my head around is the fact that the Minnesota Vikings are able to sweep the entire AFC East, a division that is very tough, a division that is arguably the best in the NFL, and get humiliated when they play NFC opponents who are going to be competitive for the playoffs. Anytime there's something on the line, the Vikings crumble. And it's not even just that. It's just the fact that the Vikings can't compete in first halves alone. We are a second half team, and this is not going to fly in the playoff. I mean, there is nothing more revealing about this Minnesota Vikings team than looking at important matchups that we've had to face this season. You have to win your NFC opponents. You have to beat your NFC opponents. It all comes down to that. As of right now, with a win over any of these NFC opponents that we face, any four of them that we lost to, a win over them could have given us a chance at making the Super Bowl, because we've seen how important home field advantage is for the Minnesota Vikings. You can't continue to play like this. And in my opinion, it's too late to turn things around. We need to turn things around right now. Into week 18, I wouldn't even play some of your starters. I'm resting them. I'm keeping them for the playoffs. I want them to be healthy. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm excited that Garrett Bradbury is going to be back with the Minnesota Vikings. Who expected that? I mean, going into the season, he was one of the players I wanted to cut. You just can't continue to play like this against opponents that you're going to have to face in the playoffs. The Packers. We gave them 6 turnovers in this game. 6 turnovers. I don't want to hear anything about weather. I don't want to hear anything about, that wasn't Kirk Cousins' fault, when most of these turnovers, at least half of them, were definitely Kirk Cousins' fault. Into the first quarter of this game, Kirk Cousins threw a pick 6. Since when has Kirk Cousins been throwing pick 6? It feels like 3 weeks ago this guy started giving touchdowns to the other team, and now we're putting a lot of the blame on the Minnesota Vikings defense. 41 points? You allowed 41 points? Well, a lot of those touchdowns weren't even the defense's fault. A lot of this had to do with turnovers from this Minnesota Vikings offense. A pick 6 in the first quarter of this game. Second quarter of the game, Chris Reed, our third-string center, came in and looked horrible. Now, I don't expect a third-string center to ever look good against Kenny Clark or even hold its own. But this went exactly how we expected this to go. A third-string center against an all-pro nose tackle is exactly this played out how we thought it was going to play out. And interception into the second quarter where the Minnesota Vikings should have had a touchdown. Adam Thielen had his man beat, but Chris Reed was a terrible center and gave up a pass deflection, which led to an interception, and the Minnesota Vikings turned it over into Green Bay territory, which killed what felt like the very first good drive for the Minnesota Vikings, as the Vikings started out with 3 straight 3-and-outs, including a 3-and-out where the Vikings started at the 1 yard line, including a 3-and-out where the Vikings only needed 1 yard to go. 1 yard, 1 yard. That's all you needed. 1 yard. Thank you to Josh Metellus. Thank you for being the only player who showed up for this Minnesota Vikings team, putting the Vikings on the best field position you can get. Oh, 1 yard? Okay, let's just punch it in, right? 1 yard, what has worked for us this season? Kirk Cousins quarterback sneaks. Let's see here. Dalvin Cook still is having a solid year. Let's just punch it in. 1 yard, right? No, we do everything but that. And the Minnesota Vikings settle for a 21-yard field goal to Greg Joseph, which was his only field goal of the game because Greg also did not want to show up to play, missing from 46 and from 50. Now, I get it. The weather's bad. Still, that's very uncommon from Greg Joseph, and you can blame the weather, but there's no excuse. I mean, Mason Crosby hit from 56 in this game as well. Into this game, Chris Reed wasn't the only bad offensive lineman. Ed Ingram had another bad day. Brian O'Neill was out. You saw Oli Udoh step in. Ed Ingram, who's been horrible this season, looked bad. Ezra Cleveland was a penalty machine. I mean, if your name's not Christian Darrisaw and you're a Minnesota Vikings offensive lineman, you look bad this season. That's been the story of this Minnesota Vikings offense. As Kirk Cousins fumbled in the third quarter on the 15-yard line. All you needed was 15 yards. 15 yards. And you give up a strip sack. Ed Ingram gave up a strip sack. Kirk Cousins fumbled it. And that is when I just stopped. Now, the pick six in the first quarter, you can say that's not Kirk Cousins' fault. Receiver might have ran the wrong route. Second quarter, obviously, Chris Reed gave up the tip pass. That's not Kirk Cousins' fault whatsoever. Third quarter, a strip sack. Ed Ingram came from the blind side. I mean, Kirk Cousins' strip sack. Might say it's not his fault. A lot of people like to say turnovers aren't Kirk Cousins' fault. Fourth quarter interception was absolutely his fault, as Kirk Cousins threw a horrible ball to his receiver where a guy named Rudy Ford jumped the route, picked off Kirk Cousins to basically seal the Minnesota Vikings game. That put the nail in the coffin as the Packers scored off that turnover, and the game was 41-3. And that's when this Minnesota Vikings team was dead in the water due to a horrible performance from this Minnesota Vikings offense. You can put the blame on the defense. I don't care. Put the blame on the Vikings defense. They weren't all that great either. But this Minnesota Vikings offense and special teams was horrible. Like I say, a Super Bowl team is a team that can win in multiple different ways in multiple different atmospheres. From what we've seen this season, that is not the Minnesota Vikings. As if it's not a noon game at home, we just look bad. And going on to the Minnesota Vikings special teams. Thank you, Josh Metellus. Thank you. You gave us a block punt, set us up on the 1 yard line. Oh, yeah, we can just score that. We can just get a touchdown. We only needed 1 yard. No, KOC decided to not run an offense that was actually competitive. I mean, like I say many times, KOC is the anti-Mike Zimmer. He's the polar opposite of Mike Zimmer. You need 1 yard? Why are you passing the ball? 1 yard, 1 yard. Can we put the play where Richard Sherman is yelling, 1 yard, that's all you need, 1 yard. I mean, everybody knows it. 1 yard, what do? You run the ball up the middle. You do a QB sneak. You punch it in with the running back. I don't care. Punch it in with the fullback. Run the ball. You need 1 yard. 1 yard. Why are you passing the ball? 1 yard. Come on. Come on, Kevin O'Connell. You're better than this. This is the first time I'm saying this season that this is Kevin O'Connell's fault. Not only this, but why are you continuing to target TJ Hawkinson in this game? Now, nothing against TJ Hawkinson, but 12 targets? 12 targets. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to say this. Kevin O'Connell obviously knows more about football than basically me and everybody watching this. But at the end of the day, 1 yard. 1 yard. Why are you passing the ball? Why is TJ Hawkinson your number one target on first downs? Why don't we have our tight ends and backfield protecting for Kirk Cousins? Because the issue for the Minnesota Vikings isn't having enough targets for Kirk Cousins. The issue for the Minnesota Vikings is having enough time for Kirk Cousins. So why do you have 4 and 5 players running routes when Kirk Cousins doesn't have enough time to go through his routes? Give him additional blockers. Have Johnny Munt on the field. Have CJ Ham on the field. Have TJ Hawkinson be a blocker and not a wide receiver. Have Dalvin Cook pick up the blitz, and now you're set. You have your third string center out there. You have your backup right tackle. You have a rookie at right guard who's been horrible all 17 games this season. You have Ezra Cleveland at left guard who's been a penalty machine. 1 yard. 1 yard. TJ Hawkinson, why is he not blocking? I mean, I get it. It's 2022. You want your tight end to be an offensive weapon. Have him a blocker first. That's not what we need for the Minnesota Vikings. Now, I'm nothing against TJ Hawkinson. Giving him 12 targets is fine. But 12 targets when all you need is protection for Kirk Cousins, not targets for Kirk Cousins, please protect for Kirk Cousins. Into this game, again, going on to this, Justin Jefferson has been contained in yet another game. And I say contained because what did it take to contain Justin Jefferson? The entire Packers secondary. I just want to say, the Packers knew in this game, how can you stop the Minnesota Vikings? They watched the tape the Eagles had on us. They watched the tape Detroit had on us the first time Detroit play us. They saw the tape the Cowboys had on us. What did they do? Triple coverage Justin Jefferson and blitz Kirk Cousins. That is the recipe for success against this Minnesota Vikings offense. As Jefferson in this game had one reception for 15 yards. One reception for 15 yards. And Jaire Alexander stands. People who love Jaire Alexander, do I have to just remind you about all the times the Packers, all the times the Vikings have owned you? I mean, the first time Jaire Alexander has had a good day against the Minnesota Vikings was this game. How about the time Stephon Diggs murdered him? How about the time Adam Thielen went against him? Adam Thielen had a multi-touchdown game against Jaire. I mean, one reception for 15 yards. Yes, you're going to give a lot of your credit to Jaire Alexander because he was watching Jefferson like a hawk in a majority of this game. But let's just not forget the fact that he had help in every single down. He had safeties over the top. He had linebackers picking up the inside routes. I mean, it's not Jaire Alexander alone. The entire Packers defense was there to stop Justin Jefferson, and they did a very good job. Now, the whole thing about Jaire's son, they have to shut up because this is not Jaire's. Jaire did not take away Jefferson in this game. The Vikings secondary, or the Packers secondary, took away Jefferson in this game. Also, in addition to this, Jefferson, this was supposed to be the year where he breaks the all-time single-season receiving record. As of right now, he needs 194 yards against the Bears to break the single-season record, which, honestly, I don't even know if that's going to be the case. Into this game, though, Jefferson, after this loss, did deactivate all of his social media's accounts, which seems to be a good thing. Maybe social media was getting to his head. I mean, corners, Jaire Alexander loves to talk. I mean, my most hated players in the entire NFL goes Aaron Rodgers, Jaire Alexander, and then probably the rest of the Packers team, not named Devondre Campbell. But still, I mean, those are two of my most hated players, and Jaire Alexander does not shut up, and I feel like he may have gotten to Justin Jefferson's head into this game. In fact, more likely than not, that is the case. Still, that aside, Jefferson is the best receiver in the league, and it takes an entire secondary to shut him down. Into this game, there was no reason why he should have only had 5 targets. You should have continued to target Justin Jefferson when your offense was not able to work. Jefferson was a decoy in this game for the Minnesota Vikings offense. We had TJ Hawkinson as our number 1 target. We had KJ Osborne, our first read on third down. Not bad. KJ Osborne had a good day. Now, that aside, the Minnesota Vikings, horrible day. Awful. Front, back, and center. Nobody showed up to play. Oh, wait. Somebody did. Duke Shelley. Duke Shelley. We have somebody to actually praise in this game. Duke Shelley, a diamond in the rough. Is this the first time the Vikings have had a good cornerback signing in free agency? First time in a long time. I mean, you can say Patrick Peterson, but still, you're still paying Patrick Peterson a pretty penny to be here. But still, we found a diamond in the rough in Duke Shelley. This is a mid-season acquisition. Had a 3rd and 1 tackle for loss in this game where he shut down this Packers defense. Packers offense. He had some pass breakups. He's been able to stop a lot of touchdowns this season so far. Duke Shelley's been nothing but money for this Minnesota Vikings team. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Minnesota Vikings decide to give him Shannon Sullivan's role once Cameron Dantzler's healthy, once Caleb Evans is healthy. If the Vikings make an addition or a difference going into the playoffs, I would just go ahead and say get Shannon Sullivan out of purple and gold because this guy has been horrible. How do you have a nickelback who's a bad tackler? That's all you got to do. That's all you got to do. Just tackle. Just get your open field tackles. If you're a nickelback, play into coverage, come up with a couple stops, get your open field tackles. That's all we're asking you to do. Well, Shannon Sullivan can't even do that. He gets his former team too, which that's even worse to see. But on top of this, I mean, Vikings defense as a whole, you got to give them some credit. They looked okay. It wasn't the Vikings defense at all why the Minnesota Vikings lost this game. Vikings defense this season as a whole has been horrendous. Into this game, wasn't all that bad. For the Minnesota Vikings, I'm not going to say that the Vikings are done. However, it feels like the Vikings aren't a Super Bowl team. Do you watch that game? Do you watch the game against the Minnesota Vikings or against the Green Bay Packers and say that this Vikings team looks like a Super Bowl team? In my opinion, they don't. And if you have the argument that the Vikings still look like a Super Bowl team, fine. You're allowed to have that argument. I mean, we've seen crazier things happen than the Vikings making the Super Bowl. We've seen much crazier things happen. But as of right now, looking at the NFC looks a lot more tough than we thought it was going to look. Ever since the 49ers got Christian McCaffrey and Brock Purdy's been under center, they've been unstoppable. 49ers may be the hottest team in the league right now. Eagles are a squad. Cowboys, I mean, I don't have to bring up how the Cowboys have looked against us in recent times. Tom Brady, we haven't beat Tom Brady once in his entire NFL career. 22 years. And we haven't even beat Tom Brady once. I mean, it's the teams that we're going to have to face in the playoffs are not easy whatsoever. So if you still say that the Vikings are a Super Bowl team, fine. You are allowed that argument, and I hope that you're right. I very hope that you're right. I will cut up an arm for that to be the case. But looking at this, in my opinion, a Super Bowl team is a team that can win in multiple different ways, in multiple different atmospheres. Like we've seen, Vikings don't look good on the road. They realistically only look good at home, 12 o'clock Central Time games for the Minnesota Vikings. And for that reason, I just don't expect that this team to make a long run, a lot of noise in the playoffs. I'd expect this team to be one and done or make the NFC Championship game. Outside of that, I'm going to be realistic here. I am looking to the future for the Minnesota Vikings. And I think that the future looks a lot more bright than the present for the Minnesota Vikings, as there's a lot of changes that need to be made on the defensive side of the ball. And on the offensive side of the ball, you got to work to progress Kirk Cousins. I know Kirk Cousins is very late into his career and he's been in the league for a long time, but this is when his career is actually starting. He finally has a head coach who believes in him. He's finally stealing first downs with his legs. Stole 2 first downs with his legs into this game. In the future is very bright. I mean, even if we lose Adam Thielen, even if we lose Dalvin Cook, our next men up look very good. Jalen Naylor in this game had his first career NFL touchdown. The rookie out of Michigan State led the team in receiving yards with 89. KJ Osborne looks amazing as a wide receiver 3. Future wide receiver 2 for this team. Had a touchdown and 59 yards in this game as well. I mean, there's a lot of bright spots on the Minnesota Vikings team right now on both sides of the ball, and there's a lot of progression that can be made going forward. So in my opinion, the future looks brighter than the present for the Minnesota Vikings. Even if we do end up losing Adam Thielen and Dalvin Cook, the future does look a lot better. For that reason, I have the Vikings continuing to improve going forward, as Kirk Cousins has a lot of room for improvement. I mean, it's crazy to say this, but I believe Kirk Cousins does kind of look like a rookie out there. He's making some bad mistakes. There were some interceptions in this game which shouldn't have been interceptions at all. It looks like he's a rookie because he finally has a head coach who's telling him to take shots down the field. He finally has a head coach who's telling him to steal first downs with his legs. He finally has a head coach who doesn't run an offense like it's the 1980s. I mean, Kevin O'Connell has more faith in Kirk Cousins than Kirk Cousins' own fans do. For that reason, I believe going forward, there's a lot of progression that can be made, and the future is bright. You have a lot of young stars. Christian Darrisaw, the only offensive lineman for this Minnesota Vikings that shows up to play week in and week out. Justin Jefferson, same story. You can go to him too as well. And the games Justin Jefferson doesn't go off, he still is a decoy, and 4 people are on him just about every snap. Vikings player of the game, I'm going to give it to Josh Metellus to be maybe the only player who showed up in this game, getting 1 blocked punt for the Minnesota Vikings where he set them up just needing 1 yard. 1 yard. That's all you need. 1 yard. Just set him up to get 1 yard. And obviously the Minnesota Vikings didn't get it, but Josh Metellus, still the only Michigan Wolverine who I'll cheer for in the NFL. Next week, the Minnesota Vikings will go to Chicago to take on the Bears. We don't know the time and date, or well, we know the date. It's going to be on Sunday. We don't know the time and how to watch this game quite yet. You have to assume that the Minnesota Vikings will play an early game on Sunday because the outcome of the 49ers game will impact whether the Vikings will actually try in this game or not, or they'll bench their starters or not. At the end of the day, I don't care if I'm Kirk Cousins, or not Kirk Cousins. If I'm Kevin O'Connell, I'm benching Kirk Cousins. I'm giving these other guys, second and third stringers, a chance to show themselves against the Chicago Bears starters. It's going to feel a lot more like a couple years ago than it does as of how we wanted this game to go, where we wanted this game to be the deciding factor on the Vikings making the number 1 seed or not. Instead, this game is the factor on us making the 2 or 3 seed, which the 2 seed is huge. I mean, getting getting home field advantage in the divisional round is massive for the Minnesota Vikings. We have one of the best, if not the best, home field advantages in the entire NFL. But at the end of the day, going to San Francisco is not going to be that bad either way. So for the Minnesota Vikings, I can see both ways of it going. But San Francisco is just not going to probably lose to the Arizona Cardinals the way the Cardinals have been looking. Still, 12-4. There's a lot of improvement to go. In my opinion, we don't look like a Super Bowl team, but that doesn't mean that we can't have a Cinderella story this year. Let me know what y'all think.